Right then. Well, let's try that again, shall we? Hello everybody, Simon Whiteley here. Welcome to my latest live stream. Today I'm going to talk about the Hawaii ballistic missile false alert accident that occurred a couple of weeks ago in January. This live stream is essentially a follow-up to the video that I released earlier this week. That video was created based upon best available information at the time. Obviously at the time that occurred there was no formal investigation or investigation report, so it was done on very limited information, and so this is essentially a follow-up to that video where I'll talk about the two investigations that have been done, the findings that they have, and how that impacts the work that I've already done. I'll then talk very carefully about the humans that were involved. In the first video I focused mainly on technology because I didn't have the information, but now I've got some information, I'll focus more on the human side of this. I'll then talk about the cast accident analysis process. We will talk about the various humans that are involved and where there were issues, and then obviously there's an opportunity for questions. So if you do have any questions, please type them in the super chat, I think it's called, the live chat. But please bear in mind I am sort of working between two parts of my office, so let me just show you the other camera that I've set up. So this is the whiteboard camera that I've set up so that I can essentially teach on the whiteboard, scribble on the whiteboard, write things, answer questions, and do a little bit of teaching. So obviously if this is, if you've got some questions about what's on the whiteboard, then please just write in the chat box. But because I am essentially flicking between both parts of the room, there will be a bit of a delay in reading your comments, so please just bear with me. This is the first time I've tried something like this, so hopefully it should go perfectly fine. And if you notice me keep looking over to the left, it's because I've got a second screen with the live stream status on it so that I can see the picture that you're seeing and if there's any issues, but also see the super chat. Okay, so let's start, shall we? Okay, right. So the accident, presumably you've watched part one, so I'm not going to go over everything I spoke about in that video. But since that video was released, the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, they conducted the investigation that they were performing, a preliminary investigation, and at the same time, in parallel, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, they also completed their investigation. Now both of those investigations have created their own outputs, some form of investigation report and some commentary, and then I'm going to go through those on my iPad and on the screen, and then we'll talk about those aspects. So let's do that. Let's sort this out. Okay, so I need the air server. Right, bear with me a second.
I'm not sure I understand.
Siri. Right, screen mirroring. Air server. Right, so let's get this working, shall we? So this that you can see on the screen now is essentially some software on my iPad called Liquid Text. And Liquid Text essentially enables you to review documents, PDF files, web pages, and then essentially drag notes out and make comments, make relations, and essentially get a good understanding of what the document is essentially all about. So I took the HIEMA ballistic missile, the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency report that was released on the 29th of January, so excuse me, earlier on this week, and it was completed by Brigadier General Bruce Oliveira, who's the investigation officer who was appointed by Major General Arthur Logan, who's the director of the Emergency Management Agency. So his assignment was essentially to look at 4 different topics, and it's important to appreciate that these 4 topics were chosen by Major General Arthur Logan, so the director of HYEMA. So straight away the investigation is focused on particular topics. Now if you're doing a cast accident analysis, you will be looking much more broadly than these 4 questions. So obviously the findings of this report and the scope of this investigation are narrower, necessarily narrower, than the preliminary investigation I did with CAST. So let's have a look at this then. So we've got the investigation was to establish what was the exact chain of events that led to the issuance of a statewide ballistic missile alert message, initiated during the course of the HYEMA State Warning Point shift change at approximately 0805 hours. So this is a classic accident investigation focus, so let's establish the timeline, the chains of events. But by thinking and focusing on that starting point, you're only thinking about things that are approximately related in time immediately before and immediately after the investigation. And effort is not necessarily focused on the organisational aspects, which may have existed for considerable amount of time. So this straight away focuses the investigator quite narrowly, and as part of the cast accident analysis, obviously you'll be looking at the timeline, but you'll also be looking much more broadly than that. Okay, so let's point B. So what was the established protocol that the HYEMA State Warning Point members were to follow during the change of shift BMA checklist, ballistic missile alert checklist simulation, and who established the checklist? So this is one of the questions I asked as part of my video about who or what was the organisation that created the checklist, and who or what organisation essentially set up the simulation, the test, the drill. So that's a good thing to focus on. C. How many times had HYEMA State Warning Point members previously practiced the BMA checklist that led to the issuance of the false alert message, and what, if any, training records exist? That's a good thing to look for. That provides good evidence. Did the established BMA checklist during the simulation test include a response protocol in the event of a false statewide BMA message was issued? And if so, did the HYEMA State Warning Point members follow the response protocol on the 13th of January? So that's one of the questions I asked as well. Now, the report essentially gives a bit of a synopsis as to what went on. They mention about whether evidence exists that insufficient management controls, poor computer software design, and human factors contributed to this event. So there is a bit of a mention of that, but not, in terms of the detail of software development to design that I spoke about, this investigation doesn't go as far as that. It does touch on it, but not in any great detail. So let's have a look. So the timeline of events. So this timeline is more detailed than the one that I created, because obviously this has come out afterwards, after the investigation. That wasn't available at the time. So I'll quickly run through this to give you a little bit of context. So 0800, in preparation for the BMA response drill, employee 4, hang on a second. Let me just read that introduction actually, because that's some important context. So the simulated BMA ballistic missile alert response drill is intended to verify that the State Warning Point shift performed the required response drill checklist tasks to a standard using the closed loop alert over the wireless emergency alert and emergency alert system. Employee 1 erroneously initiated a real-world alert over the WA EAS. So employee 1 is basically the main individual involved with issuing this false alert. So I'll draw this on the board in a little while. We'll develop the control structure after we've gone through this, and we can see how those interactions conspired to cause this particular outcome. So 0800, in preparation for the BMA response drill, employee 4 and employee 2 discussed their plan to conduct a BMA drill at the end of their shift. Employee 4 prepared a recording of the Pacific Command PACOM ballistic missile alert notification script from the BMA checklist manual. Employee 4 discussed leaving the state warning point area, while employee 2 told the day shift about the previous shift change drill. So just to give you a bit of an understanding of this, as I understand it, based on the Facebook press conference and from this investigation report and the various news articles, employee 4 and employee 2 appear to be the shift supervisors. So they are essentially in control of each of the shifts throughout the 24-hour period. I understand that employee 4 is the shift leader or shift supervisor for the midnight shift from midnight to 8 AM, and employee 2 appears to be the shift leader, shift supervisor for the morning shift from 8 AM till presumably 8 hours later. Now, it appears that employee 4, the midnight shift leader, apparently that previous night, so the Sunday to Monday, so the Friday to Saturday night, the previous shift also did an unannounced test or drill during the switchover between the night shift and the evening shift and the midnight shift. So they'd already had this drill surprise sprung on them at the time. So there's questions about, well, why did employee 4, why did the midnight shift supervisor think it was appropriate to perform the drill at the time that they did? Bearing in mind they did a mixture of announced drills, so people in the team knew they were going to be expecting a drill, and as in this case, an unannounced drill. So 0803, the incoming day shift entered the state warning point. Employee 4 met with employee 5 and discussed the BMA drill. It's not really clear just yet who employee 5 is. I did suspect it was the incoming shift leader, but it's not really clear from the narrative. Employee 4 initiated the BMA drill using a phone outside the state warning point area, calling into the state warning point STE. STE is, let's have a look, special test equipment, yeah, there we go. Secure telephone equipment, so that's what ST stands for. So employee 4, the outgoing night shift supervisor, they initiated the BMA drill using a phone outside the state warning point, calling into the secure telephone equipment. So from everybody inside the state warning point, inside the command centre, they've just received a call on the official equipment that they would expect a real message to come from the US military, from PACOM. So they've received this call, and it's through the official lines. Employee 2 activated the STE speaker, so it's a speakerphone. At this time it was announced loud and clear, exercise, 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 and then the message was broadcast, and then it was concluded with exercise, 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 which is a normal procedure for all drills, including this BMA drill. Now I volunteer at the Royal International Air Tattoo, and every year we have an exercise where we test communications and emergency responses and all that kind of business. And I've worked in this kind of control room environment where exercises are going on, people are busy, all kinds of things happen. Now, it's important to understand that as part of this kind of drill, you're essentially drilling a real procedures that you would be expected to do in a real scenario, but you're doing it under exercise conditions. But obviously it's really important that everybody involved in the exercise, and even those that are not involved in the exercise, know that an exercise is going on, so that they can behave appropriately and go through the motions appropriately without necessarily the stress of a real scenario, but also that B, if something does happen during the exercise that is real and needs a real response, that everybody knows that there's a clear delineation between exercise and real conditions. Okay, so both the day and night shift began executing the BMA checklist. So this is interesting. So we're going through a shift change procedure. We've got a night shift crew and a day shift crew, and they're both working through a BMA checklist at the same time. So there's a potential challenge here between coordination and control. Who is in charge? Has everything been done? Has somebody done something that they thought? Has somebody not done something that they think somebody else is doing, and vice versa? So nobody does it, if that makes sense. So Employee 2 recorded the time of the simulated ballistic missile impact. Employee 3 started the countdown timer. Employee 2 simulated activating the BMA whale tone siren and verbally indicated completion of that action. At 0806, Employee 1 logged into the alert sent system. So this straight away shows the interaction between Employee 1 and some kind of computer system, in this case something called the alert sent system. And then Employee 1 waited for Employee 3's announcement of the simulated siren warning activation. Following the simulated siren announcement, Employee 1 erroneously activated the real-world alert code. So that's interesting. So that there appears to be an overlap between the actions of Employee 1 and the actions of Employee 3. There is some interaction there, or implied interaction, that is necessary to make sure this message gets out properly in a real scenario or not during a drill scenario. So the alert sent system, this is a drop-down menu that includes the test missile alert. So this sends the message internally to the agency, so it doesn't go outside the agency. And then the real missile alert, which sends the message to the public. Missile alert was selected. The computer asks to confirm the choice. Employee 1 clicked yes. And then at 0807, the state warning point began receiving incoming WEA, EAS messages on their personal smartphones. So it's at this point they know that they've sent it outside the agency. It's not confined to the agency. Employee 13 called the SWP and received confirmation of the false alert. Employee 13, I believe, is General Logan. So he's his title is the Director of the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency. And then at 0808, Employee 6 called the SWP and received confirmation of the alert. I think that Employee 6 is potentially what's the title of the chap? The Hawaii Emergency Management Agency Administrator, Vern Miyagi. I think that's who Employee 6 is. And then at 0808, the Adjutant General called the state warning point and was notified of the false alert. So they knew that it was a false alert because they knew that they were supposed to be doing a drill, but Employee 1 essentially issued the false alert. Employee 6 notified Employee 11 of the false alert confirmation. And then at 809, Employee 4 used the HAWAS broadcast to the counties. The HAWAS is, as I understand it, the Hawaii warning system. So this is it's not really clear from the information available, but it appears to be some form of broadcast system that can communicate with other parts of the government organisation and in potentially emergency services. So they initiated at 809 to warn the counties, attention all stations, this is the state warning point, there is no ballistic missile threat to Hawaii, this is a drill, I repeat, this is a drill. And then Employee 4 then conducted roll call to confirm that each county's acknowledgement of the false alert. So what this essentially means is once they broadcast that message, they then go down a roll call list to confirm that each of those stations has confirmed acknowledgement of that false alert. Then the Honolulu Police Department called the SWP and was notified of the false alert. And then the state siren vendor called Telecom and was notified that it was a false alert. At 8:12, Employee 5 directed Employee 1 to send out the cancel message. So let's just have a look at that timeline there then, sorry. So at 8:12, Employee 5 directed Employee 1 to send out a cancel message. And this was at 8:06. So at 8:06, there was 6 minutes there between the message being sent and then 5 minutes between the message being received inside the state warning point. And then it was at 8:12 that Employee 1 was directed to send out the cancel message on alert sent, so effectively to prevent the onward broadcast. Employee 5 stated that Employee 1 just sat there and didn't respond. Employee 3 returned to the state warning point from starting the time clock and saw Employee 4 and Employee 10 repeatedly get on the HAWAS, letting counties know that it was just a drill. Employee 2 was on the phone with Employee 6, briefing them on the situation, Employee 5 was alerting the command staff. Employee 1 was sitting and seemed confused. Employee 3 took control of Employee 1's mouse and sent the cancel message. At no point did Employee 1 assist in the process. Now, before I get into the nitty-gritty of that, I just want to make an important point. When you're doing any kind of safety investigation, and particularly if you intend to do a cast accident analysis, it's really important to understand who these people are in terms of the command structure, the control structure. And so having a report that says employee number X, employee number what, number Y, there we go. If you're going to do that in a report, that means that any future analysis is going to be made more difficult, and you have to make assumptions about who these people are, what their roles and responsibilities are, and where they fit in the control structure, and what authority and accountability they have. Now, I can appreciate this was a rapid investigation, and for human resource type issues, you don't really want to be naming employees, and you don't really want to be saying what role they are, because then it's obvious to the public who these individuals are, and that can cause problems. But from a safety investigation perspective, that information is absolutely critical to be able to understand what happened and why it happened, and then how to and who to direct questions to if you need to, investigate further. So one of the recommendations I would make is that if you are required if you're doing an investigation for whatever reason, and you are required to provide a report into the public domain, and you have these potentially conflicting human resources employee type issues, then I highly recommend that you sanitize the report or draft a different report in such a way that it doesn't identify individuals, but it doesn't destroy the necessary information to do a proper full-on cast accident analysis, if that makes sense. Okay, so going through the timeline then, so it's clear that employee 1 pressed the button, and it appears clear that that employee 1 intended to do that. That was their intention. So there are questions over, well, why did employee 1 behave that way, and why would it cause, why would they not realise that this is an exercise? Because everybody else appears to realise this was an exercise except for this individual employee. Now, let me just see where, okay, so the exercise was essentially initiated without the staff in the state warning point, the day shift, or potentially even the night shift people that were still there, knowing that it was knowing whether it was an exercise or not. Now, when the call came into the state warning point, employee 2, as you can see here, activated the STE speaker. And so during that time period between receiving the call, the person on the other end beginning their message, which would begin with exercise, 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 there may have been a time period where between the employee 2 answering the phone and pressing the speaker that may have cut off the words exercise, exercise, exercise. And so the people in the state warning point that were listening to that speaker may not have heard that first part. So one of the recommendations, one of the questions if I was involved in the investigation, is to go and find out in terms of interview people and find out whether they heard the first exercise, 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 or whether it was cut off between the time that the employee 2 picked up the phone and started the STE speaker and between the time that employee 4 initiated their broadcast. Bearing in mind that there's an implicit safety requirement there on the person who sends the message into the state warning point, that they should wait or pause a couple of seconds so that the person who answers the phone has time to switch it onto the speaker. And I know that sounds a bit Mickey Mouse, but from a safety control structure perspective, that small time delay is fundamental to make sure that the people who must hear the message, everybody in the state warning point, must hear all of the message. And if that makes sense. So it's entirely possible, and it would need to be established, was exercise, 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 the first part of the message, cut off by that time delay. Now, obviously, as you go through the message contains three components. You've got the initial exercise, then you've got the body of the message, and then you've got the final exercise. Now, the body of that message contained, "This is not a drill." And then the last part of the message was obviously exercise. Now, if you are sat in a work control room environment such as they were, and somebody puts the speakerphone on, if exercise is missed off, or even if it's not missed off, you'll be focusing on the content of that message so that you can update your mental model and then behave accordingly. Now, obviously, this message contained the words, "This is not a drill," and if you're awaiting a significant message such as this, and you hear that this is not a drill, then your emotional response, your human factors will begin to kick in. You know, your blood pressure will increase, your breathing rate, your heart rate will increase. You might start to sweat. I'm feeling a bit hot now doing this. You know, and that emotional and physiological stress could then prevent somebody from hearing the rest of the message. So if you're sat there and you receive the message, you don't hear exercise, you just hear what sounds like a real message that says this is not a drill, it is entirely likely that your perception, you know, your hearing may be affected. And with something as serious as that, you know, everybody's going to die, thousands of people are going to die, and you're the only person there to press the button and get that message out. It's understandable that you might miss something like this. And so the design of that drill message containing "this is not a drill" and not recognising that there's a potential for that exercise at the beginning to be cut off, that should have been considered in the design of the procedure, in the design of the script. Now, it may be that the script doesn't need to change because it needs to be as realistic as possible, but the way that the drill was conducted without any notice, you know, everybody should have been potentially primed to know that this message was going to come in, or if not, it should have been, somebody should have potentially walked around and say, "Look, you know, this is an exercise." But again, it depends on the circumstances. I'm not sort of making recommendations on how they solve the problem, because there's loads of ways to do this. But it's important to recognise this is a hair trigger away from sending a message to millions of people, so it should be treated with the appropriate respect. Okay, so let's just move on. So the other thing to notice as well is that employee 1 logged into the alert system. Now, I don't know the details of the software, I've not seen it apart from that screenshot I shared in the last video, but I understand that AlertSense is perhaps a web-based system, or it obviously requires a username and password to log in. So there will be a period of time when employee 1 is taking action, doing their task, because that's what they've been asked to do, and logging into the system. Now, we don't know if there was any issues with logging in, whether there was wrong passwords or anything like that, or whether it takes a long time, but that employee will be involved in the task. And so they may not necessarily be listening for other things going on. I mean, it does say here, employee 1 was waiting for the employee 3's announcement of the simulated siren warning activation. Well, one of the questions will be, well, how did employee 3 announce that they had activated the warning siren? Did they literally say, "I have now simulated the siren warning activation, exercise, or did they just go off the checklist, warning siren activated?" You know, so it is a drill, it is an exercise, but they didn't speak about it like that. Now, I'm not suggesting that they should say exercise every time, because it's a big mouthful and it gets in the way of doing an exercise. But that's an important, important link there that might have helped employee 1 appreciate in their mental model that this was an exercise scenario. And then we get onto the human-machine interface aspects. So, on the AlertSense software human-machine interface, as I discussed in the last video, there is a drop-down menu that includes the test and missile alert messages. Employee 1 selected missile alert and then clicked yes on the confirmation. So from employee 1's perspective, their mental model was that this was a real, genuine scenario. because they didn't hear or didn't acknowledge exercise for a number of potential reasons, human factors reasons, physiological, psychological reasons. And then they sent the message out. So from their perspective, they did what they were supposed to do. They didn't fail. They did their job right as fast as possible, and that should be recognised. This was not a human error. They were doing their job that they were supposed to do, and they shouldn't be persecuted and prosecuted for it. But standing back from that part of the control structure, obviously other parts of the control structure knew and believed that it was real exercise. And so there is a variance between the mental model of the employee 1 and everybody else. And that mental model, synchronicity, was not maintained and not dealt with. Okay, so let's go a little bit further. So the state warning point, at 8:13, the state warning point issued a cancellation of the civil danger warning message. That's what CW stands for, civil danger warning. And this prevented the initial event from being rebroadcasted to phones that may not have received it yet. So if the phone was not on at 8:07, someone was out of range of cell coverage, passengers on flight, it does not send out an all clear message. Employee 10 then notified the county emergency management via the HAWAS, and then at 8:13 employee 6 posted there is no threat to Hawaii and that it's a false alert on a personal Facebook page. The civil danger warning message and cancel was received in the state warning point email inbox, and then at 8:15 the state warning point continued to receive calls from the public about the emergency alert service system. So at 8:15 the majority of the public presumably still think this is real, this is valid, and so they're calling into the state warning point and jamming the phones up, worried about what's going on, we need information. At 8:15, employee 11 notified a KSSK engineer of the false alert. I've not been able to figure out what KSSK is because it's not in the acronyms list at the top. I mean, if you know what that is and you can tell me, that would be really good. Oh right, hello. Somebody's saying something. Hi Phil, you have echo at the moment. Right, okay, let me just see what I can do about that. How's that? Is that any better? Let's turn that down a little bit, see what happens. Okay, so you should still be able to hear me. I'm guessing it's through this microphone, not that one over there. So you should be able to hear me fine. If there's any feedback. This is where it gets a bit complicated, trying to control all these different views. Okay, so let's put that to one side over here so that I can see whether people are talking to me. It's all live TV, folks. Actually, it's just stopped. Excellent, thanks, Phil. You see, this is a good learning point for me because I've got two cameras set up. They've both got microphones within them, but it's very difficult for me to make sure that they're not both, feeding back off of each other. It's a bit of a pain, I'll be honest. Right, so where were we? So I don't know what KSSK engineer is. I don't know why they would need to be notified, but obviously it must be important. Otherwise it wouldn't be mentioned in the investigation report. So the state warning point at 8:17 received message from employee 11 about the WEA EAS message. Employee 11 sent a message to all HIMA staff that there was no threat. I'm not sure who that individual is. Hawaii Department of Defense notified Hawaii News Now. So that's an important part of the control structure. So the Department of Defense separately notified one of the media outlets that this was a false alarm. So that's the first major, apart from Facebook and Twitter, that's the first major notification of the general public. All the other notifications were government agencies and organisations. At 8:18, the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency Public Relations Officer contacted Employee 6. Employee 6 notified them that it was a false alert. and suggested to start posting on social media. At 8:19, from sources within the Department of Defense, Hawaii News now alerted the public that the BMA message was mistakenly sent. The following message from the Hawaii News Now app was pushed to mobile devices. There is no current ballistic missile threat. The emergency alert warning has been sounded by mistake, according to Civil Defense. So that's interesting. So I don't know what coverage Hawaii News Now has, or whether how many people have got the app installed on their phone. But it's good to see that they're taking proactive effort to get that message broadcast. But there's always a bit of a if an individual receives two different messages that are conflicting, that are safety related, what are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to deal with that? So perhaps one of the recommendations for the future is that some priority is put on the messages so that people know who to believe. But the challenge with doing that is if this, and being a bit conspiracy theory, if an enemy adversary manages to cause this message to be distributed so that everyone's running around in panic, if then the false alert message is then broadcast, if then an adversary then actually attacks, then everyone's in panic, nobody knows really what to do, and any proper real live messages that are then broadcast may get swept up in the noise and ignored. So there's those kind of aspects to think about. At 8:19, the state information technology contractor called employee 6 and was notified of no threat. I don't know whether that's significant or not, whether the state information technology contractor is involved with internet networking and communications networks, and perhaps they needed to know why all of a sudden the traffic on their system was so big. That would be interesting to look at a bit further to assess whether they are, sufficient and able to deal with these kind of peak traffic loads under emergency conditions. The HIEMA's official Twitter account sent out a tweet that said there is no missile threat to Hawaii. The message was posted at 8:20 and is only distributed to those who follow Hawaii EMA on Twitter. At 8:20, Hawaii Department of Defense notified KHON and at 8:22 notified KITV. I think they're two news channels. I think KHON, they've done quite a few videos on YouTube about this event. And then at 8:22, employee 6 called employee 11 and provided a status update and stated he will call county emergency management agencies. Now, it's not really clear what the difference is between county emergency management agencies and, where is it? Oh, there we go. So this one at 8:09, employee 4 uses the HAWAS to broadcast to the counties. So it's not really clear what the difference is between this and that. I don't know what the difference is between those two and why there was such a significant delay. So that would be interesting to clarify whether they are two different things, two different recipients of that information, and whether one has, needs to be informed earlier. So there's a potential recommendation there for the change to the procedure, to the checklist, to make sure that the county emergency management agencies are informed as early as possible, such as the HAWAS broadcast to the counties. At 8:23, HIEMA posted to its official Facebook page, and then at 8:24, employee 6 notified Hawaii County Civil Defense of the false alert. And then at 8:25, the same employee notified the Maui County Emergency Management of the false alert. At 8:25, Oleo Television called employee 6, who notified Oleo, I don't even know if I'm saying that properly, I apologise, that it was a false alert. So that's another media channel. So from a redesign of the procedure for the future, there should be categories of organisations that need to be contacted in whatever order. And if it means that some individual is dedicated to contacting the various government, military and other emergency services departments, and somebody else is dedicated to contacting the media and communicating via social media, and then somebody else is dedicated to answering incoming calls and distributing amongst them, this suggests that perhaps there wasn't enough people in the command centre to deal with this situation, if that makes sense. Employee 6 tried calling FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, but didn't get through. So it's interesting that at this point of the investigation, it's not really clear why they were calling FEMA and what the significance of that was. And I did highlight in my control structure model that the state warning point crew needed to interact with FEMA to help them deal with the alert management system, the IPAWS system. So at 8:27, employee 6 called employee 11 to discuss options. Another civil danger warning message was not advisable, so they decided on a civil emergency message, I think that stands for. Let's have a look. Where's the... There we go. Yeah, CEM, so that's the civil emergency message. So I'm getting an impression that there's a difference between a civil danger warning message and a civil emergency message. So I don't know the details of the communique system and why there's a difference there, and how the system behaves differently depending on whether it's a CDW or a CEM message. So that would be interesting to understand the logic behind that. At 8:31, employee 6 informed employee 11 that they were going to send the civil emergency message. And then at 8:32, the state DAGS called employee 6 and was notified of the alert. I don't know what DAGS is because it's not in the acronym list, so if you know what it is, please let me know. Oh right, KSSK is a Hawaii radio station. Oh, thanks for that, Phil. Really appreciate it. Okay, so state DAGs, that'd be interesting. 8:32, employee 6 remotely logged in to the WEA EAS system via an encrypted connection, and a CEM message was drafted and sent. So that's interesting. So that implies that there is some technical networking aspects to this particular recovery situation. And so it'd be interesting to understand how that fits into the control structure and whether there's any potential for inadvertent messages to be sent in the future via that particular route in the control structure. Now, it's not really specific to this accident investigation because we're focusing on employee 1 and the software in that area, but that particular part of the control structure may also have potential weaknesses that could result in this same accident if they're trying to recover the situation. At 8:45, CEM false alert message was posted. The following action was executed by the EAS. So this is the emergency alert system. So EAS message over the local TV, radio, audio broadcast and television crawler banner, false alert, there is no missile threat to Hawaii. And then number 2, the wireless emergency alert message broadcast was sent to cell phones. False alert, there is no missile threat or danger to the state of Hawaii. So that was at 8:45. So it was about 38 minutes between when the message was initially broadcast and then when basically a false alarm message was broadcast via the telephone mobile alerts system. Okay, so that's basically the timeline. That's a lot more detailed than the one that I had available to do my last video, and it highlights a couple of things. So the first is the structure of the team. It gives an implication of the tasks that it gives an idea about the tasks that the team need to perform. It gives an idea about the team roles, the team structure, and also the technology and communications systems that they interact with. Excuse me. So that can be used to develop the control structure further, which we'll do in a minute on the board. Okay, so the checklist. So the BMA checklist is essentially what the state warning point members are expected to follow during a test, during a drill. It's a 20-step, well, it's called a 20-step state warning point ballistic missile quick response checklist. And obviously there's a sense of urgency to get the messages out as quick as possible, as you would expect. So I'm going to quickly run through this because it's got some important things in it, and there's a couple of findings that I think are, just from review and thinking about it in terms of the stamp-based methods, the control structure, systems thinking, it identifies some interesting aspects. So there is an initial notification. I don't know if I can make this bigger so that you can see better. Let me try. Right, so that's a bit bigger. So let me just move this a little bit so that you can see it. So this is the initial notification. Oh, what have I just done? Sorry, everybody. Yeah, there we go. So this is the checklist. So the initial notification, I don't know if that's big enough for you to see. So step 1, receive notification message from Pacific Command over the secure equipment, telecoms equipment, on speaker mode and record. The exercise message is preceded and ended with exercise, exercise, exercise during a practice drill. The simulated PACOM message on the 13th of January was also preceded and ended with that. Employee 1 stated that he or she did not hear the exercise, 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 but claimed she heard this is not a drill. So it's not really clear from the investigation report or the press conference that I listened to whether the message itself is a recorded message that is played down the telephone, down the STE to the speakerphone, or whether it's an actual live person speaking and reading from a script, from an exercise player. So, you know, and the message itself contains this is not a drill. So the question is, you know, there's a couple of questions there. So is it that the actual message that's captured, you know, is it sort of in a procedure for somebody to read out, or is it a recording of an actual message that's come from Pacific Command? You know, what is the format of that? And who decided on the content of that message? Why did they decide that it should be structured in that particular way for an exercise? There's some interesting questions there. So the report states that employee 4 prepared a recording of the PACOM BMA notification script, then left the state warning point, you know, room, and then called into the state warning point room via the secure telephone equipment. So employee 1 would have heard the message, as I mentioned earlier, through the official channel saying this is not a drill. So then the employee 1's mental model at the time would be, I'm receiving this message through the official channel. I think later on in a press newspaper article, employee 1 said that they didn't recognise the voice on the telephone, and so they, you know, that might be an extra cue to make them think this is a real situation, especially if they didn't hear the original exercise, 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 but then only heard this is not a drill. So bearing in mind the message performs two sort of functions. The first is to pass a message to the SWP to take action, but also to prime them that this is an exercise. So this exercise message performs two functions. It's not just about practicing the actual message, it's also telling people, updating the mental model of everybody on the team, everybody involved in the exercise, that this is an exercise. So that subtle but very, very significant command or control action is what's needed to make sure everyone involved knows that it's an exercise. Even if it's a short notice surprise exercise, they really need to know it's an exercise. You know, and it's already a highly primed system, you know, and putting not a drill in the initiation message is of course risky. You know, this is a loaded gun scenario, if you like. So 0 to 5 minute actions. So step 2, sound the attack warning siren for all counties from the siren computer. So obviously that didn't happen, but the person who was in charge of doing that, we don't know whether they included, you know, that this was a simulation or that this was an exercise or not, to make sure that everybody involved knew that it was an exercise. Now obviously in a close-knit team of people, you know, there is an implicit assumption that everybody knows what's going on, and so it's unlikely if you're inside the exercise, you're going to keep saying exercise all the time. You know, it's implicit everyone's personal mental model is implicit that everybody knows it's an exercise. You know, maybe a bit blasé about it. Step 3, activate the emergency alert system. Step 4, contact all counties over the Hawaz. Announce over the PA in the EOC. Now that says simulated, so EOC I think is the Emergency Operations Centre. No, maybe it's not. EOC, yeah, Emergency Operating Centre. So they announce over the public address. I'm presuming PA is public address system because again, that commonly used acronyms not in the acronym list. So I'm presuming that somebody announces over the PA in the Emergency Operating Centre. So I'm presuming that's the building that the state warning point is housed within. So there's a question over, well, did somebody actually read out over the PA, this is not a drill, blah, 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 or did they just go to do the personal address but not actually do it because it was simulated? So there was a potential opportunity there to reinforce the mental model that it was an exercise, or quell the employee one mental model that it was not an exercise and that it was actually real. Step 6, disconnect HECO power from the EOC. I don't know what the details of that are, and I don't know why they would need to do that. It's not really relevant for this investigation. Close and secure the EOC steel front doors, simulated. So at this point, the state warning point BMA drill ended. So this is like the real checklist, but substituted for the drill checklist. It's been added to. And then the 5 to 10 minute action items. So step 8, notify all leadership. Step 9, contact FEMA. Step 10, turn on the VTC event brief in the conference room. So that's the video teleconferencing facility. Activate the phone recording system. Create an incident in the web EOC and enter it in the event log. Excuse me. Verify all checklist items have been completed. Ongoing action items. So stand by to operate the STE and communicate with PACOM. Monitor defensive and or retaliatory response by the US and its allies. Step 16, do not respond to media. This is the Public Information Officer's responsibility. So just to pick up on this little bit then. So, that's not supposed to happen. So this bit. Oh, of course. Sorry, yeah. So let me just extract that bit out of there because it's relevant. So in a real scenario, there is an implied requirement that there is somebody performing the role of public information officer. And so they deal with responding to the media in a real scenario. Now, in a scenario where a message is sent falsely, it doesn't really matter whether it's in this case or any other message that the state warning point distribute. But if they distribute that message falsely and there is a response, you know, there's lots of people, media ringing into the state warning point, then obviously that role, the public information officer's role, is necessary to be there all the time. Now, I don't know how they control their staffing levels or who performs this role, but I would expect that individual role is performed by somebody at all times, 24/7, available to perform that role. So even in a real situation, in a false situation, there is somebody that can take that workload off of those people in the command centre, the state warning point, dealing with other important activities on these checklists. So step 17, advise staff contacting the state warning point to shelter in place. And then deactivation action items. So PACOM determines missile will not impact Hawaii. Step 19, if missile impact time expires and PACOM has not updated the SWP. And then finally, step 20, update leadership of any PACOM updates. So step 19, I have a real problem with this because it does not cover From a system safety engineering perspective, this procedure does not cover all scenarios. So if it's a real scenario where we've got a missile threat and PACOM's alerted SWP that there's a threat coming, they should, strictly speaking, they should wait for PACOM to give them the all clear. Now, there is a circumstance that's quite distressing, that PACOM may not be able to respond because, you know, there's been an impact or a detonation, or the communications has been knocked out. So the state warning point could be sat there waiting for an all clear signal and it never arrive. So presuming it is safe to continue as normal when they've not been updated by PACOM or the missile impact time expires is not the safe thing to do. They need some kind of qualified view as to whether it is safe to call an all clear or to stop the procedure. So there are a couple of scenarios that I've highlighted. So this step presumes that only one missile has been fired. It doesn't necessarily account for multiple launches or threats, and that there is no potential for other threats, e.g. radioactive fallout from an incoming missile interception. So for example, if there is a real alert and the US military intercepts that incoming missile, it is possible that the debris from that missile could still spray itself over populated areas. And so how does this procedure, how does the action of the Hawaii State Warning Point need to change to recognize those particular scenarios? So they haven't apparently considered that situation. As I said earlier, it doesn't also consider the PACOM may be wiped out or that comms may be disturbed, denied, or destroyed. And then the interaction feedback loop between PACOM and HIMA needs to be assessed, and this procedure needs to be changed. So one of my recommendations is they need to revisit this procedure, they need to think about the different scenarios, and they need to write this procedure working closely with PACOM so that everybody knows what they're doing at either side of that interface and they can behave appropriately. And then finally, step 20, update leadership of any PACOM updates. Okay, so there's a number of findings which I'm going to quickly go through and then I'll comment on. So let's have a look. Okay, so for each of these findings, I've got a few points that I'd like to make. So let me see what I can do. So So based on the documents reviewed, information collected and interviews conducted during the investigation, the investigator finds the following. So it's important to recognise that obviously as part of a cast accident analysis investigation, an investigation that involves cast accident analysis, obviously you would list your findings, but you would also discuss the development of the hierarchical control structure model and the various findings that came out of that stage of the cast accident analysis. So A, State Warning Point has the ballistic missile alert checklist, but does not have BMA procedures included into the SOP, although it's a new initiative. So straight away there's some issues with checklist procedures and standard operating procedures that are not clear and could lead to challenges and difficulty for the people involved in trying to respond to these ballistic missile alerts. Excuse me, and then B, so the State Warning Point successfully practiced the BMA missile checklist 26 times as determined by the telecoms branch records of the State Warning Point reporting on alert sense. So I imagine that inside the State Warning Point or the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, there is a group of people, a telecom branch, that will monitor telephone calls and network traffic and the alert sense tool, and they will keep a record of what's going on so that everybody amongst the command structure, control structure, has a record, a log of what's happening and how they're involved or not. C, notification for step 1 of the BMA checklist is used for actual ballistic missile attack using phrases real world, and this is not a drill. So this is basically the real notification. This is the notification that you would expect to receive if it was a real situation. So you have to appreciate that anybody receiving this notification, if they don't hear exercise, 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 for whatever reason, then they will believe that it's a real scenario. And so it's absolutely fundamental that their mental models, the people involved, their mental models are updated to make sure that they know it's an exercise. And on this occasion, for whatever reason, we've yet to establish, the employee one appears to believe that it was a real situation. And so it's clear that the control actions of saying exercise, 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 and the way that the drill was conducted, the people involved and the way that they behaved was not sufficient to maintain a common mental model that this was an exercise amongst the people involved. Now, I can appreciate that real world style drills are necessary, but it's important to recognise the technological aspects of your system which may contribute to causing an unintended broadcast, as in this case. So, you know, when you design your drills, when you design the drill, you know, when you train people to do drills, you need to make sure you think about how close you are to causing an accident, how close you are to issuing a message you didn't mean to. So it's not just creating a checklist, creating a drill practice and using real world messages may appear to be, you know, pretty mundane, but actually it has significant effects, as in this case, if it's not analysed and mitigated properly. So D, let's have a look. The established checklist did not include a response protocol in the event of a false ballistic missile message. There was a cancel message which stopped further ballistic missile messages from displaying, but does not send a new message to the public. Eventually, a civil emergency message was developed and sent. The established protocol has since been updated to include a false alert message. So this one is interesting. So why wasn't there one in the first place? And I touched on this in my last video. The investigation should find out why that protocol did not exist in the first place. Is it because the change management analysis activities were inadequate? And if that is the case, what other areas of the system are also inadequate and are just waiting to jump out and cause another accident? So that's a really important recommendation. Go and look and find out why that was the case and where else may be implicated. So E, the preparedness branch previously identified the need to refine and reformat the state warning point ballistic missile alert checklist to include a deactivation section or all clear EAS message. Had the protocol been developed within the last 2 months, the delay in sending out an official notification over WEA EAS that the alert was false would not have happened on the 13th of January. So this is interesting because this touches on this section here, steps 18, 19 and 20. So this is the deactivation action items, and I'd already pointed out, you know, from a missile impact perspective and the fallout from an intercepted weapon, you know, that's missing from this. But somebody in the preparedness branch or some group of people in the preparedness branch had already identified the need to change the procedure. So there's questions over, well, why wasn't it changed? Why, you know, who was responsible for dealing with that? Why wasn't it changed? And also, what have they changed it to now? Or, you know, in the aftermath of this accident, what are recommendations for what things need to be in there? So let's have a look. So F, hang on, E. Yeah, so they previously identified the need to change the checklist to include the activation or all clear message, but that wasn't done. So why was that? Why didn't that happen? Okay, so F. The preparedness branch worked with the operations branch to conduct 3 no-notice exercises of the BMA checklist during the month of December. So there were 3 previous no-notice exercises in December. We don't know whether the individuals in this particular accident were involved in that scenario. Apparently there's no training records to confirm that, but that will be interesting to know. whether particularly employee 1 had already been involved in no-notice exercises, or whether there were other issues with those no-notice exercises that were not dealt with, or were identified but not dealt with. The design of these exercises was in compliance with Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Programme and included a written exercise plan and exercise evaluation guide. A formal AAR, which I think is called After Action Review, I think. Is that right? Yeah, After Action Review was conducted, but there was nothing in the After Action Review that a deactivation checklist section in the checklist should be further developed. So this is interesting for 3 reasons. The first is, if an After Action Review was conducted, why didn't it pick up that the deactivation section was inadequate? You know what? So why was that review inadequate, and why did it not identify the need for the deactivation part of the checklist? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, the design of the exercises are in accordance with the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Programme and are included in a written exercise plan and exercise evaluation guide. So I would recommend 2 things. The first is the Homeland Security Evacuation Exercise and Evaluation Programme is looked at to identify whether it adequately covers this type of security exercise and evaluation, and whether the actual exercise and evaluation that was done, or should have been done, I don't know if it was, we don't know, why was that inadequate to identify these potential issues? And then also the written exercise plan and exercise evaluation guide, did that include details about making sure that everybody's mental model was accurate and kept up to date about the fact it was an exercise, given the severity of the outcome if an alert was issued when it was not valid? So this goes back to change management, safety assessments and human factors assessments, and making sure that safety constraints are included in the design not only of the operational system, but also the drill and training of that system. Okay, so G, let's have a look, where are we? F, G. So G, all state warning point shifts did not participate in the HSEEP evaluation, the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Programme evaluation, and were conducting their own drills separately from the exercise programme without exercise control protocols. So this is quite interesting. This is quite a significant, aspect. So if the state warning point crew were not evaluated and were doing their own drills without exercise control protocols, how can we be surprised if, in this case, employee 1 thought that it was a real situation and not a drill? We can't really be surprised at that. And so this needs to be looked into and investigated further to understand, well, why was that? Why was that not adequately enforced? The exercise control protocols may have made things safer, but this would need to be examined. So again, in my previous comments on paragraph F about the adequacy of the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Programme and the written exercise plan and exercise evaluation guide, it almost doesn't really matter whether they're adequate or not, because the state warning point shifts were not involved in it. But if they were involved in it, then obviously it needs to be suitable and sufficient. So we need to understand whether, what they did was inadequate, and we need to know why that was. But we also need to be mindful that the HSEEP and the exercise plan and exercise evaluation guide, we need to make sure that they are adequate and safe. So instead of just saying we need to do those, it'll be fine, instead of just doing that, we need to make sure that they will be fine and then do them, if that makes sense. Okay, so H. So many questions on policies and procedures regarding the BMA checklist have previously been asked by the state warning point personnel and HIEMA personnel outside of the state warning point, without answers, resulting in confusion, and frustration. So that's interesting. So if there's been loads of questions asked by various people in and outside, the state warning point, with regards to policies and procedures for the alert checklist, but there's been no feedback from response. Well, why is that? Who or what is the organisation that's above those two groups, and who is responsible for the checklist? And why has there been no feedback? Why have they not dealt with those potential issues? Now, obviously, it doesn't really say here as part of the investigation what those questions were, and it would be interesting to find out if those questions were relevant to this particular accident. But there's definitely needs to be questions about the management of this and why no feedback and response was provided. You know, that's really important to be established as part of the investigation. And we'll see in the control structure that we develop in a little while how that fits into the overall picture. Okay, so where are we? We've talked about H, let's talk about I. So, HIEMA has suspended all SWP BMA drills until the investigation is complete. Okay, well, first off, whilst that might appear to be the safe thing to do in peacetime, it means that the overall control structure constraints, the high-level safety constraints, are not adequately enforced because the state warning point crew may not be competent to issue a real BMA when required or if required. So whilst this appears to prevent the immediate cause of issuing a false alert, it means that the state warning point individuals are not practicing giving a high speed response to a real alert. So this is actually negative for safety, if that makes sense. But obviously, you know, people will argue, well, you know, what's the probability of, you know, North Korea launching a ballistic missile? That's not the point. The point is that they won't be practiced and drilled enough to deal with it when they need to deal with it. So that, for me, I don't think is an appropriate safety, you know, an immediate safety change. It should be carefully reconsidered. But that's what safety management is all about. Okay, so J. The BMA checklist is not detailed, which allows shifts to interpret and differ in protocol significantly when executing the drill. Furthermore, the drill was conducted during a shift change, which added to the confusion of who was in charge and which shift is executing checklist actions. HIEMA operations provided the following guidance to the SWP in December. So that's interesting. So there's two topics there. The first is that the checklist is not detailed enough so that the shifts can interpret their own protocol between shifts. And then furthermore, this particular drill was conducted during a change of shift, which added to the confusion of who's in charge, but also which shift and which individuals are actually doing the checklist actions. So that's like the worst of all worlds. You know, it should have been coordinated. But we'll see that as we look at the control structure. Okay, so I'm going to, let's have a look. Or do I need to jump ahead on this one? Shifts would look. Let's talk about this one, number 3. Oh, no, this one. Let's talk about that one. So the shifts should look at differences in executing the checklist with 2, 3, 4 personnel and make recommendations to operations. So this is interesting because first it suggests that there are challenges executing the checklist depending on staff numbers. The second thing is it suggests that there are issues with the actual structure of the staff and the tasks that they're required to do and the time constraints, technology constraints. You know, there's quite a lot of interesting design of the team that needs to be considered to deal with these kind of issues with execution of the checklist. Right, let's have a look further. It's okay. Right, so the Alert Sense program, so the software human-machine interface that Employee 1 uses to communicate with the IPAWS broadcast system. So the Alert Sense program was replaced, the Alert Sense program replaced an older program in mid-December 2017. So that's interesting. No technical training was provided to the state warning point, only basic application. Many state warning point personnel felt this training was inadequate. Right, okay, so everyone's banging on about everyone's banging on about human error and pointing fingers and, you know, sacking people. And yet the software that they're using was only replaced in December, like at the time this accident occurred, let's say 3 or 4 weeks ago. We don't know whether the individuals involved had holidays and maybe, you know, have only worked on the software a couple of times. But the software has been changed. There's been no technical training provided, and people felt that it was inadequate. So, remind me again how that's human error. That's not only software issues and changes to the system change, system modifications, change management, but also training and personnel management. And as part of the investigation, you'd want to ask the questions of the employee one, particularly, did you receive the training? How confident were you with the software? And were there any software issues that contributed to your challenges, in this particular scenario? And I would argue that that person may say no because they behaved, from their perspective, they did what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to press and send the message. So this isn't a human error on the part of somebody pressing the wrong button, and this is not necessarily a human error or an issue because of the human-machine interface. The human-machine interface certainly didn't help the situation, but then, according to the operator, it was a real situation, so you wouldn't expect the software to try and prevent them from sending a real message. So there's quite a few deep, interesting issues associated with that. Not just technology, not just human operators, but management, change management, and training that needs to be examined as part of further investigation. Okay, so the next thing then, I. So all SWP employees with access to AlertSense are required to take and did complete a FEMA course prior to accessing AlertSense. This course provides basic information on the IPAWS. The goal of this course is to provide authorised public safety officials with increased awareness of the benefits of using IPAWS for effective public warnings, skills to draft more appropriate, effective and accessible warning messages, and best practices in the effective use of common alerting protocol to reach all members of their communities. There were no personal training records, which make it difficult to determine what training each SWP member has taken. Employee 7 stated that Employee 1 completed this course. Okay, so first off then, all employees are required that use AlertSense are required to take a FEMA course, which basically introduces them to what IPAWS is. And if you recall back to the video I did earlier this week, I included a network diagram picture of the IPAWS system, including the IPAWS Open Gateway. And that slide, I understand, is taken from either the same training or similar training to what the State Warning Point employees would have done. Now, it doesn't, that information is interesting, but what's more interesting is that there's no personnel training records. So in the event of an accident investigation, there's no way to know with any certainty what level of competence or what control algorithm or mental model individuals had in the context of the work that they were doing. So one of the recommendations is to make sure that you capture personnel training records and that they're up to date. Okay, so moving on to N. Let's have a look. Okay, so HIEMA mistakenly believed that it had to consult with FEMA to issue an event code which contributed to the 38 minutes delays, 38 minutes to issue an official notification that the threat was false. HIEMA has corrected this concern and understands that it is HIEMA's authority to official a notification. So, as I said in my video, there was the potential for delay due to this interaction between HIEMA and FEMA. So it's clear that the individuals inside the State Warning Point that needed to consult FEMA didn't necessarily know what their authority was so that they could take action. So there's two recommendations from this, or three recommendations. The first is to establish the true responsibility authority between HIEMA and FEMA and make sure that the people involved are trained and know what to do, and that the checklists reflect that situation so that there's no delay in the future. Okay, so let's just, SWP supervisors do not consistently ensure employee performance levels meet expectations. So to me, this is a bit of a human resources issue, but it's also evident in terms of the control structure. So obviously the SWP supervisors will be at a higher hierarchical level in the control structure than just normal employee operators. And the supervisors have a responsibility from a safety perspective to make sure that the employee's behaviour and performance is sufficient to ensure that they can deliver the message when required so that they don't violate safety constraints. Now, the investigation should establish why the supervisors were not able to do that, or what behaviour they did have, and assess whether that's acceptable or not, and then make appropriate recommendations for change. P. Poor performance evaluations have been documented on select SWP individuals. This has created morale and competency issues. So again, this is about higher level management and coordination. So if there were poor performance evaluations, whatever that means, from a safety perspective, poor performance is bad. But if we're talking about personal attitudes and behaviours, so long as it doesn't affect the safety constraint enforcement, as a safety engineer, I'm not really that interested. But so poor performance should include consideration of the enforcement of safety constraints, as well as any other performance evaluations that management want to include. Q. So employee 1 has been a source of concern for some time for the same SWP staff for over 10 years. Employee 1's poor performance has been counselled and documented, and the SWP members have stated that they are not comfortable with employee 1 as a supervisor, two-man team, or as part of the SWP in general. He does not take initiative and has to be directed before he takes action. He is unable to comprehend the situation at hand and has confused real-life events and drills on at least 2 separate occasions. So, in a nutshell, that's quite a damning thing to say about that particular individual. And so that raises serious questions about the management of that individual and the monitoring and management of their performance in the context of a safety-related role that gave them access to sending a broadcast to over 1 million people. So presumably the management of employee 1 made the decision or accepted that that person would continue in that role, and presumably acknowledged and accepted the potential outcome of that, the accountability for the outcome of that. And so for this individual to be fired without necessarily looking at the management of that is unacceptable. So one of the recommendations, I suppose it's more of a human resources recommendation than it is a safety recommendation, but the management of the individuals and the team and their performance from a safety perspective needs to be got hold of. There needs to be further investigation into that, and there needs to be established boundaries as to what is and what is not acceptable for what is essentially a safety-related role that has the power to issue a safety-related message to millions of people. So that needs to be dealt with very carefully, but also very robustly. And this is, from my perspective, this is not just a human performance, human resources employee perspective. This is about recognising that this individual and the other individuals, the management involved, are managing a safety-related system, and so it should be sufficiently robust. And if there are issues, they should be formally documented and dealt with, and performance issues dealt with. Or it may be that there should be criteria that says if these individuals are behaving in a certain way, they should not be involved with certain sensitive safety-related activities. So for me, that's a significant question for people management and recognition of the safety aspects of the system. So here we go. So this is where we get into the sort of meat of the human factors, if you like. So Employee 1 stated that he or she initiated the real-world civil danger warning message. Employee 1 stated he or she did not hear the announcement exercise, exercise, exercise at the beginning and end of the simulated message. Employee 1 also stated that she did not recognize the caller's voice and heard "this is not a drill" over the speaker. However, all other SWP members clearly heard exercise, exercise, exercise at the beginning and end of the drill. So that to me is a clear human factors topic of interest. It's clear human factors aspects. So employee 1, as I mentioned earlier on, employees 1 mental model was that this was a real scenario, and so they acted accordingly. They did not press the wrong button, strictly speaking. They pressed the right button for what they believed the scenario was. It was not a mistake to press the button. They behaved as in a real scenario. So the investigation should establish why that was the case. Why did they believe it was like that, and why did others believe differently? Is it because, one example from a human factors perspective, is it because this particular individual was suffering from other issues? You know, were they fatigued? Was it, I mean, it's a relatively early morning shift. Did they have a disturbed night's sleep? Did they have issues with their ears? You know, did they have some form of disability? You know, was it because of the technology that was used to communicate the message to everybody? As I mentioned earlier on in the call, was it because it was cut off in the time period between picking up the phone and pressing the speaker button? You know, there's lots and lots of interesting questions there. And the only way to get those answers and really understand is if this individual is interviewed by proper human factors experts. But putting that to one side, if the employee is now out of the picture, there are still issues with the system that need to be resolved. So one of the safety constraints is making sure that whoever is in the command center taking action knows, their mental model knows that it is an exercise. But again, that doesn't remove the human-machine interface software aspects that need to be resolved as part of this. So this is really interesting. This is really interesting, and personally, I don't think this is strong enough evidence to fire the person or, you know, send them death threats. I think it's disgusting that, you know, that's happened. You know, this individual, from their perspective, has behaved as you want them to behave, and yet they're getting all this hassle and death threats for effectively doing their job. And now they're out of work and they're not going to get any money coming in. And, you know, they basically did their job. They did what they were told to do. You know, the fact that the system conspired against them, we need to understand how it conspired against them so that other people, as well as this individual, don't suffer the same fate. Okay, so, so employee 5 directed employee 1 to send out the cancel message. Employee 5 stated that employee 1 just sat there and didn't respond. Employee 3 returned to the state warning point from starting the time clock and saw employee 4 and employee 10 repeatedly get on the Hawaz, letting the counties know that it was just a drill. Employee 2 was on the phone with employee 6, briefing them on the situation, and employee 5 was alerting the command staff. Employee 1 was sitting and seemed confused. Employee 3 took control of employee 1's mouse and sent a cancel message. At no point did employee 1 assist in the process of correcting the false alert. So, okay, great, but why? Why did the person behave that way? Was it because they were shocked that they thought nuclear Armageddon was coming? Or was it that they realised their mistake and couldn't believe it, and so was in a state of shock and couldn't respond? You know, we need to understand that, because, you know, I'm sure, you know, there are, in fact, it was in the news recently. There was a young lady in the UK that sent a message to their boyfriend by accident, which was intended for their best friend, and it basically said something along the lines of, I can't believe I've cheated on my boyfriend. I feel really bad about it. But she accidentally sent it to her boyfriend. And then a few minutes later, because she was so distressed, she sent another message basically saying, goodbye, I know you hate me. And she killed herself. She committed suicide. You know, so, I mean, that sounds unbelievable. It sounds absolutely, you know, it's horrible. But this is the kind of emotional response we're talking about. We are humans, of course, and somebody who realizes that they've made, you know, taken an action, whether it was incorrect or correct, doesn't really matter. But when you realize that you've taken such an action and it's had such an impact, that can be devastating for a lot of people, you know, to such an extent that they take their own life. And in this particular scenario, you know, this person did what they were supposed to do, but it resulted in such a negative outcome. And I sort of reach out to them and say, look, you know, the system conspired against you. It wasn't designed adequately enough to ensure that you knew it was an exercise. You believed it was real. You took real action, you know. This is the situation we find ourselves. Right, so that's the sort of end of the major report. There are some recommendations that I'm going to touch on. Actually, just before I get to that, so I've already mentioned it. Employee 1 was terminated. I understand from the press conference that the reason the individual was terminated was purely based on the recommendations in this report. There may be some other reasons that are not mentioned, but personally, it's not clear. You know, the reasons to terminate somebody do not seem to be valid in this situation. This person behaved as they were supposed to do, but you know, the situation was that it was wrong. So why have they been terminated and why now? And obviously this harms the investigation, the opportunity to learn and prevent this type of accident from occurring. So I understand that the employee has been terminated, but that also that they haven't been cooperating with the investigations. I understand that they wrote a written statement about what happened, their view, and that was provided to the Hyena investigator within a few days of the event occurring, but I've not yet seen the content of that statement. I don't know the details of it. So all we know is that they believed it was a real situation and that's why they acted, and that they did not hear exercise, 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 and that they only heard this is not a drill. So recommendations. There are 23 recommendations, and the ones I'm going to focus, well, I'm going to quickly go through them and comment on a couple of those. So the first one is install a computer process to rapidly issue alert cancellations on the WA EAS system. And it says it was completed on the 13th of January. So there's no real detail about what that involves, but there is a potential that they've actually made it more likely that they will get incorrect messages, alert cancellations. In fact, I didn't touch on this in my video, so maybe I should just focus on it a little bit. So in the video, I talked about providing the message and not providing the message. If you create a computer process to rapidly issue alert cancellations, there is another dangerous scenario, and that is that you initially send out a real alert. There is a danger to the public and they need to know, but then the computer system or the people using the computer system inadvertently send out a cancellation message. So the danger is still there, but the people involved, the public, think that the danger has passed because they've received a cancellation message. And so that's a new safety-related scenario that really needs to be considered. And doing a rapid system change such as this may mean that they haven't considered that aspect, and they really should do. And this is the danger with doing any rapid changes in the aftermath of an accident. Okay, so B, add an all clear selection to the alert sense drop-down menu in step 2 of the BMA checklist and develop deactivation procedures in the BMA checklist. Completed. Okay, so if this checklist here is the revised checklist, then this section here deactivation action items still needs to be sorted out. I don't think that's acceptable. That needs to be thought about and changed because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. And again, if they've added all clear selection to the alert sense drop-down menu, the software HMI, that's another cause of sending an all clear message potentially when it's not clear. So that relates to point A, recommendation A I mentioned a minute ago. So we don't want to, if there is a danger, we don't want to say it's all clear if it's still dangerous, because it's dangerous. Okay, C, add into the confirmation message what action is confirmed, i.e., are you sure you want to send a real-world ballistic missile alert? Two things. The first is that confirmation message, that feature, that behavior is not sufficient protection against inadvertent selection or clicking through confirmation dialog boxes. You know, if you refer back to the 1980s Therac 25 radiation therapy machine accidents that Nancy Leveson talks about in her book Safeware, the individual operators, the nurses involved, were so quick at using the software that controlled the radiation therapy machine that they were able to click through messages which were error messages very quickly without even realizing what they were. And if the computer's software is so badly designed that it comes up with these pop-up dialog boxes all the time, then you've got to remember that the human is going to adapt and they're going to get used to pressing dialog boxes very quickly and getting rid of them, especially if they're used to doing that at home. I know I am. So that change is not an adequate human factors change and needs to be dealt with. As I said on the last video, the software needs to be subject to a human factors and a system safety assessment and appropriate changes made to take account of human factors issues. Now the other second aspect to it is that change, are you sure you want to send a real-world ballistic missile alert? That change would not have prevented this accident because, as it's already been stated, employee 1 believed it was a real scenario. So if you ask them if you want to send a real message in a real scenario, of course the person's going to say yes. So it's nonsense. Okay, D. Add a function to confirm the specific selections on the drop-down menu with the supervisor's password required to enforce the two-person confirmation procedure. I already touched on this in my last video. I do not recommend this for two reasons. The first is adding this extra level of complexity means that in a real scenario, it's going to slow you down to respond and get the message to the public. And, you know, if it also includes somebody forgetting a password and having to change a password and all that nonsense, you're just slowing down a high-performance system, which is high-level safety constraint, is get the message out as soon as possible. And putting that fix in there is going to violate that safety constraint and make the system slower and more prone to not getting the message out in a real scenario. So I do not recommend that. That needs to be different. That should not be implemented. Other things need to be changed. Other things need to be thought about. The second thing is about the two-person confirmation procedure. As I mentioned in my video last time, those two people will necessarily need to share the same mental model. So if both of those people believe that it's a real scenario and not a test scenario, then that won't mitigate you sending a false alert. It will only work if there is a miscomparison between the mental models. So if the second person thinks it's an exercise and the first person thinks it's real and presses the real button, yes, that reduces the chance that an inadvertent real alert is sent, but you're still highly reliant on the human factors of those two individuals and the human-machine interface of the software. So let's say, for argument's sake, we implement option recommendation C. So now the user interface says, are you sure you want to send a real-world ballistic missile alert? If your second person is looking at the screen and they read, are you sure you want to send a real ballistic missile alert? They may well detect, oh, that's wrong, we don't want to do that. But they may well not, because of human-machine interface aspects, they may not even realise, they're only human. They may click through that menu as well. So these recommendations are not robust recommendations, and they're not going to prevent this particular outcome occurring. And in fact, in some cases, they'll actually stop the system behaving as fast as it needs to in a real scenario. So I highly recommend getting some system safety engineers, human factors engineers involved in this, and quickly. I've already read that recommendation. So D, add a function to confirm the specific, I talked about that one. E, revise step 1 notification of the BMA checklist for a practice drill eliminating the phases used for actual ballistic missile attack, real world, and this is not a drill. Replace with this is a drill. Continue the established practice of preceding drill messages and ending drill messages with exercise, exercise, exercise. Okay, so I like this recommendation. It sort of solves the problem. But again, as I said earlier on, if everybody else in the state warning point is receiving this message via a speakerphone, then it's important that the broadcaster of that message has a pause sufficient to cover the time to make sure that everybody hears it. And I would also suggest that perhaps the person who answers the phone and receives that message also restates it to everybody, or at least make sure that everybody in the command center has the same mental model. Touch them on the shoulder, this is an exercise, and get them to confirm that that's the case. Some people might say, oh, well, that's a bit over the top. It's a bit of overkill doing that. I'm not suggesting that's the solution. All I'm saying is the safety-related constraint, the high-level safety constraint, is that everybody in the command center has the same mental model that it is an exercise. That's the most important safety constraint. Okay, so revise BMA checklist to detail actions to standardize best practice and eliminate confusion. Including the revision, repeat all directives and actions allowed and use a 2-person rule to verify directives and actions. I agree with that recommendation. I think it's good, but we need to recognise that everybody understands why it's important we do that, and that it's not just part of the procedure. It's an important, the reason why that we do that is to make sure that everybody shares the mental model. This is the mitigation for that, breaking that high-level safety constraint. Eliminate conducting practice drills during change of shift to clarify command and control. Right, 2 things. The first is the enemy does not care when you do shift changes. In fact, the enemy is more likely to attack during a shift change because of these reasons. They want to cause as maximum disturbance and disruption and damage and destruction as possible, and the best time to do it is during a shift change. So I've got 2 recommendations. The first is that this one is inadequate. You should drill at all times, especially difficult times, but you must make sure everyone knows it's a drill. The second thing is, I would not recommend publishing when your shift changes are. And I might even go to the extent to say that you shouldn't do shift changes around 12, 3, 6 or 9, on the clock. Don't publicise that information because it's valuable to an adversary. If they want to know when's best to attack you, it's when you're in the toilet, in bed, or doing a shift change. That's when they'll attack. So just think about that. So this recommendation to not do these drills during a shift change, I agree, it will solve the problem of issues with clear command and control, but that means that people won't practice during times of difficulty, and that should be nailed down and dealt with. H, establish a formal review update, scheduled to assess current SWP guidance, SOPs, documents and protocols, identify opportunities for enhancement, evaluate whether they are current, user-friendly and consistent in designing content. Great recommendation. I'd argue that should have already been done. I would think that a recommendation to establish why that wasn't already done should also be included in here and then fulfilled and dealt with. I. Establish an SWP knowledge library where current protocols and checklists are housed and easily accessible to ensure all staff are working off the same versions of procedures. This is a really important requirement because, as I say, you need to make sure that everybody in the control structure, no matter what shift they're on, they all have a common mental model, they all have a common control algorithm, they know what to do, when to do it. You know, standard practice. But it's important, you know, when you draw the control structure and see the different teams with their different protocols and different checklists, this was bound to happen. So that coordination and control needs to be built back in, and that's what this recommendation is all about. J, add risk management activities to develop controls and make risk decisions. As control measures are developed, risks are re-evaluated until the residual risk is at a level where the benefits outweigh the cost. Ensure that appropriate decision authority then makes the decision. Okay, now this one's a bit awkward, I'll be honest. So this recommendation, to me, sounds like it's not anything to do with safety risk management. Because as I said in the previous video, this scenario is all about two hazards. It is about the hazard of there being a missile threat and not sending a message out when it really needs to be. And then there is the other scenario of there is no missile threat and you send a message out, which is what happened in this scenario. Now, all of the requirements, all the recommendations that need to improve the control structure to minimize this event or eliminate this event from occurring again, you can't apply risk assessment to that. They are necessary controls and constraints that must be enforced to prevent this from happening again. And if the governor and the head of HIEMA want to say this will never happen again, we want to guarantee that, by doing some risk management in accordance with these words, that's not going to happen. You're not going to eliminate these issues. There are so many issues in the control structure of the individual teams, their procedures, how they interact with each other, the management above that, the human resources, the software, all of that stuff, change management. There are issues all over the place. This is not just an individual's fault. So I will be very careful about item J. I think that where does it say? Risks are re-evaluated until the residual risk is at a level where the benefits outweigh the cost. It just doesn't fit right. There's no apparent evidence of appropriate risk management in the way that this was implemented. There's no consideration of human factors or system safety engineering. So the risks that they're talking about are not safety-related risks, and they really should be thinking about those aspects. K, ensure future SWP planning efforts include input from planners in the agency's preparedness branch. Okay. Again, I would have expected that should already be done. If there is evidence that that's not been done, then we need to look at why that's the case and make sure that it is done in the future. Close that loop. Review other state warning programs and protocols to determine best practices. Okay, cool. And implement those best practices if they're appropriate. Ensure future planning efforts are sufficiently completed and SWP personnel are trained before initiating procedural changes. Okay. Document and maintain training records with any training program. There are associated training records. Records document who was trained, when they were trained, and what skills they have mastered. Training records provide documentation for agencies, information for personnel evaluations, and support for promotion and salary increases. Okay. The thing about this is it's interesting that I'd recommend that there's a tight coupling between the high-level safety constraints and the individual training and the training records and training requirements. So it's really clear the link between the safety constraints and the training. So why they're training in a certain way, why the training should be designed in a certain way to make sure that those safety constraints are adequate. So Provide alert sense technical training to SW personnel and revise to include BMA procedures. Okay, so we need to establish why or what contribution lack of training had in this scenario. And would it have made any difference if they had received training? I'm not convinced it would have done, I'll be honest, given that the person was behaving as though it was a real scenario. Include simulation training and a practice simulation computer for the drills. The mistakes participants make in a simulation are learning experiences. The outcome is not damaging to the organisation, its equipment or its personnel. If the SWP participates in simulations during a practice drill that are modelled after real-world issues, it can be free to make mistakes, learn from them, and apply the learning before going out to the real world. Okay. Yeah, so it's a good idea in principle, but it doesn't solve the problems that are relevant to this accident. So even if we have a simulator, the person believed it was a real scenario. So the recommendation is to make sure everybody knows in good time before they do anything that it is a trial, it is a test, it is a drill. You know, and this mitigation will only help mitigate people making mistakes with the computer system, you know, or pressing the wrong button. But as I said, if the human-machine interface was properly designed, then it would have dealt with that and minimized it anyway. So spending all this money fulfilling this recommendation might make everyone feel better spending money and looking like they're doing something, but it doesn't actually address the fundamental issue. It's, in my view, the money spent on creating an extra simulation and training and practicing computer for drills, you should spend that on doing a proper system safety assessment and getting the software changed. That's what I think. That's my personal view. But I'm a bit, you know, I'm a Yorkshireman, so I don't like spending money. But anyway, that recommendation is not going to solve the problem. It's money that doesn't necessarily need spending. Spend the money on changing the software and making the system more robust. Q. Conduct a needs assessment to determine knowledge, skills and abilities that the SWP staff should possess and identify training protocols or policies to address gaps. Great. R. Fill the 4 SWP vacant positions to remove the added burden on SWP personnel. Excuse me. So that sounds like evidence that the team was understaffed. So that means that the control structure had components effectively missing from it, and so the workload on the others may have been sufficient to put them in a situation where they were prone to not hearing things or making mistakes or whatever. You know, so this is a systematic issue. So there are questions as to why they've had difficulty, you know, filling vacant positions. Why is that? What were management doing about it? You know, those questions are very important because that, you know, having vacant positions in your control structure means that straight away your control structure is already in a higher risk, inadequate situation before you even start. And that could have been a contributor to this accident. But obviously the investigation hasn't gone into that detail at this stage, so we might never know. But we can look at that on the whiteboard in a few minutes. I'm aware it's been going on for quite a while now. I am actually going to continue because I've got a lot of interesting stuff to say. So if you don't mind, obviously this is going to be recorded so you can watch it again at your leisure. But there's a lot I need to talk about. There's a lot I need to write on the board, so I'll do that. I'll continue doing that. I wasn't expecting to be able to keep going for this long, I'll be honest, but there's so much interesting stuff that's come out of this accident. You know, it's an absolutely brilliant example, and particularly for CAST as well, because, you know, it's relatively straightforward, this accident. It's not too complex. Okay, so we talked about staffing, dealing with current SWP staffing challenges and preparing for the challenges that lie ahead requires a two-pronged approach that focuses on attracting, hiring and retaining qualified SWP personnel and scheduling existing personnel to maximise efficiency. So is there a contribution, if there wasn't enough staff, is it a potential contributor to employee one thinking it was a real scenario? What we need to think about that, need to look into that. Were there any personal issues or were there any wider management organisational issues that have affected this? So S, whether the duties, hang on. Yeah, it's this one. So evaluate whether the duties of SWP staff could be expanded to support other HIEMA activities and keep staff engaged without jeopardising their core mission. Well, this is interesting because it suggests that workload is low, so does this mean arousal is low and the crew are prone to error? And then when things do get busy in a drill or a real scenario, they're too aroused and so make more errors. I can't remember, I'm not a human factors engineer, so I can't recall the exact source, but there is like a bell curve of human behaviour whereby if it's low arousal, they make more errors. If it's high arousal, they make lots of errors. And there's like a narrow sort of band in the middle where people can perform optimally for a certain finite amount of time, and then they tail off. And that is obviously person specific and varies from day to day, depending whether you've had a good night's sleep, for example, and whether you've had plenty of food inside you. So that's human factors aspects to think about. Okay, T, to ensure all training to SWP is formalised with specific learning goals, objectives and performance metrics. U, conduct a command climate survey to all HIEMA members to determine morale and communication within the division. I'll be honest, it would be interesting to know what the employee one and the other employees that were suspended, what their view was, so that would be a recommendation. 5, HIEMA leadership should be properly trained to ensure employee performance meets or exceeds expected levels. So this is a recommendation for the leadership about employee performance and, okay. So, hang on. Yeah, and then based on my findings, the director of HIEMA should take... Right, hang on, sorry. So for V, HIEMA leadership should be properly trained, but there's no details or recommendations on what actions should have been taken in the past to address the adequacy of personnel performance, e.g. employee one. Why, if there were recognised issues, were they not resolved by management? So they're important recommendations. W, based on the findings, the director of HIEMA should take appropriate disciplinary action regarding involved employees. So first off, I'm just going to go back to the beginning quickly. So the scope of this investigation was look at the chain of events that led to this situation, establish the protocol, look at what the BMA checklist simulation was, who established the checklist, how many times SWP members have practiced it, whether there was any training records, whether the checklist included a response protocol, and whether SWP members followed the response protocol. Nothing in there says anything about recommendations about disciplinary action regarding involved employees. And this is an important point about accident or safety investigations and recommendations for further action. That, to me, indicates that blame has been applied to somebody, some people, in this case, employee one. It's recommended that appropriate disciplinary action is provided by the director of HIEMA. I don't think that's an appropriate recommendation to make. Based on what I've seen about this incident, I don't think there's any appropriate disciplinary action, especially against employee one, given that they behaved as they should have done. the system that surrounds that individual was inadequate. The management of personnel, the management of procedures, the management of training, the management of personnel levels, all of that stuff was inadequate. And in my view, this recommendation is inappropriate, but doesn't also factor in those aspects. And so for me, this investigation is incomplete. Some of the recommendations are good, some of them really aren't, some of them are a bit in the middle, but there is a lot of work to do here, and this is not just a simple, it's going to be sorted next week. Now, from a bigger learning perspective, anybody who's not involved in this accident, but is involved with control rooms, emergency response procedures, communications, broadcasting, anything like that, they can learn loads from this particular accident, and think bigger and broader about what they can do, what they can learn. So we've got to a bit of a natural break there. I've sort of been going on for 2 hours. I thought I'd be able to get through this a bit quicker, but there's just so much to talk about, so much to think about. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the broadcast for a few minutes and just have rest my voice a little bit, take a couple of drinks, and then I'll come back. So if you want to take a bit of a comfort break, I'll see you in, I don't know, 5 minutes, something like that. See you in a minute. There we go. Is that working? Yep, okay, right, back again. Okay, so that's better. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly go through the FCC report. It's just a couple of slides, and then I'm going to jump on the whiteboard and we're going to do some drawing on the whiteboard. So we can talk about, we can expand, so we can essentially now expand this part of the control structure and look at what's in there, what the interactions are, and how it interfaces with this. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about the interfaces with the emergency services or other state facilities, but I am going to focus on this area with employee 1. Okay, so let's, how do I do this? Screen fair, oh, there we go, that's a bit confusing. Right, so this then, how do I, yeah, okay, so you can comfortably see that, so that's good. And you can hear me, there's voice, you can see that, excellent. Okay, so this is the Federal Communications Commission, Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau preliminary report on the investigation that they've done. And this was done relatively independently, as far as I'm aware, from the investigation done by HIEMA, which is what we've just gone through. So this was released the day after the HIEMA report on the 30th of January. So they basically do a timeline. They then talk about Chairman Pai. I think that's how I pronounce his name. I apologise if I've got it wrong. So Chairman Pai, Chairman of the FCC, immediately called on the Bureau to investigate. So to date, the Bureau has interviewed key stakeholders, including HIEMA employees, representatives of other emergency management agencies across the country, alert origination software vendors, including the vendor who supplies the HIEMA, and then the wireless service providers. So if you recall from some of the news reports, there were difficulties in getting the emergency messages via the wireless alert system to individuals' mobile phones. And they don't know if that was an individual mobile phone software or phone issue, or whether it was a network broadcaster, mobile phone network issue. And the Bureau's investigation is ongoing, so obviously these findings may change in the future. So I'll quickly go through this. HIEMA's midnight shift supervisor. All right, so we've confirmed it is the midnight shift supervisor, is the employee we mentioned earlier. It begins a no-notice ballistic missile drill at a shift change by placing a call pretending to be US Pacific Command to the day shift warning officers. So that might suggest why the employee 1 did not recognise the voice on the phone. They were obviously primed to presume it was somebody from Pacific Command, but also if they're on a different shift, they may not know the other people on the shift, so the other shift to them. So that's one of the reasons why they might not have recognised their voice. The midnight shift supervisor plays a recording over the phone that properly includes the drill language, exercise, 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 but also erroneously contains the text of an EAS message for a live ballistic missile alert, including the language, "This is not a drill." The recording does not follow the script contained in HIEMA's standard operating procedure for this drill. That's interesting. So there is a standard operating procedure for that drill that contains a script, but that script was not followed. So we would need to understand why that was the case. The day shift warning officers receive this recorded message on a speakerphone, while other warning officers understand that this is a drill. The warning officer at the alert origination terminal claimed to believe, in a written statement provided to HIEMA, that this was a real emergency, not a drill. Okay, so just to put a fine point on that then, as I mentioned in my previous video, we need to take care not to point fingers at people. Just because a group of people have a different view of the world, a different mental model to somebody else, doesn't mean there isn't some issues going on that are not related to that individual. It could be that the individual, was hard of hearing, or there could be loads of reasons, but we shouldn't just focus on that. We should look at the bigger picture. And that's what the point of cast accident analysis is, not just to focus on individuals and blame, but to look at the systematic issues as well. This day shift warning officer responds as trained for a real event by transmitting a live incoming ballistic missile alert to the state of Hawaii. In doing so, the day shift warning officer selects the template for a live alert from a drop-down menu and clicks yes in response to a prompt that reads, "Are you sure that you want to send this alert?" Okay. Events after the false alert. So we already know about all of that stuff. We're not really that interested in that at this stage because we want to understand why that false message was sent. So I'm just going to go over that. We've been over it loads of times before. So preliminary findings. I'll prepare myself for this. A combination of human error and inadequate safeguards contributed to the transmission of this false alert. Number 2, HAIMA's lack of preparation for how to respond to the transmission of a false alert was largely responsible for the 38-minute delay in correcting the alert. Okay, that's fair enough. Number 3, HAIMA has taken steps designed to ensure that an incident such as this never happens again. You know what I'm going to say. Human error conclusions mean that the investigation is not finished. Okay, and I know it's a preliminary investigation and they're going to do more work, but the individual involved has not been cooperating because of the behaviour and because of personal choices. So we're not going to be able to learn from this accident unless we take a different tact to the way these investigations are being done. As I've already said, it's not simple human error. There are contributions from software, individual, management, communications, drill practice. There's an absolute goldmine of issues all over the place, and we shouldn't be reducing it and focusing it down to individual human error. Number 3, HAIMA has taken steps designed to ensure that an incident such as this never happens again. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the recommendations that have been proposed will not prevent this from happening again. The individual behaved as you wanted him to behave, and the system changes that are recommended will not solve that problem and will actually make things more difficult in a real scenario. So it's not accurate. Next steps. So this is the final slide. The Bureau will continue its investigation and issue a final report including recommended measures to safeguard against false alerts and to mitigate their harmful effects if they do occur. Okay, that sounds great, brilliant, but we need to be mindful that the recommendations that we make don't actually make problems elsewhere, such as when we want to send a real alert, because then what is the point of having an alerting system? After the issuance of the final report, the FCC will partner with FEMA to engage in stakeholder outreach and encourage the implementation of best practices. That's not enough. It really isn't enough. Best practices is not enough. Those stakeholders need to take a really good look at what they're doing and have a real good think about and apply system safety engineering practices and human factors. They need to include that in the design of their systems. And it's not just the stakeholders that are involved with, the communications. It's in other places as well. Federal, state and local officials must work together to prevent such a false alert from happening again. Of course. So that's it. That's where we are. So what I propose to do now is I propose to get on the whiteboard, start scribbling it out, and start talking about the control structure and some of the aspects that should be investigated further. So without ado, I'm going to go over there. So just bear with me, because obviously when I'm over there, I can't see my computer screen. I can only see, the board and write on it. So if you do type something, there will be a delay in me responding to it. So let's go over to the screen. How do we do this? Whiteboard. Right, there we go. So this is the whiteboard. Here we go. Turn that off. Okay, right, so I need some pens. Need a quick drink. Hello everybody, this is my big whiteboard, it's huge. I love this thing. I find it really relaxing drawing things and writing things and thinking about things using a big whiteboard. Because it is so big, you don't have the subconscious block that you've got the edge of the page to worry about. And so having a big whiteboard like this is brilliant. The only downside is obviously once you've scribbled all over it, you have to clean it off and it takes ages. Right, so let's build a control structure then for the part that we're interested in. So this is technical issues. Right, come on, work. There we go. Right, report. So what we're going to do is we'll focus on this area and expand it. Don't mean to turn my back to you. Right, so looking at the timeline then, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a list on the left hand side of the various people involved and what their titles are, and then I'll arrange them on here in the structure we think that it needs to be. So the first one is the so there's employee 1. Let's put employee 1 in the centre because we know that they are really key to this particular event. So employee 1, and the FCC referred to them as warning officers. So that's what they are, a warning officer, employee 1. Okay, and obviously this person has a control algorithm and a mental model, and the control algorithm defines how the employee behaves, and then they have control actions out of there, which in this case interact with the alert sense system. So we'll put alert sense here. And then that's how the message gets sent to iPause. I think it's the open gateway there, look, open gateway. And then you've got the wireless emergency alerts. Like that. So this, it's not much room. I'll squeeze it in there. So this is the public, there we go, like that. And they receive the wireless emergency alerts. And then obviously when the official message was sent, they also received the wireless alert, as other people did in the state warning point. So that's employee 1. And the control action, the unsafe control action that we're interested in is obviously this one. So this was control action provided that causes the hazard of sending a message to the general public when there is no ballistic missile threat. So let's have a look. So who else is there? In preparation for the response drill, employee 4 and employee 2. So so employee 4 appears to be the midnight shift leader supervisor. So what we'll do is we'll put in fact, what I'll do save a bit of space, because it's going to get small, isn't it? So you've got employee number 4, who is the shift supervisor for the night shift. So I'm going to put that in there. Night shift supervisor. So you can tell it's live. Night shift supervisor. So they interacted with employee 2, which is the day shift supervisor. Day shift supervisor. So what I could do with doing is just highlight in the white colours. So this, I'm going to put a line across here like this. So this is just to highlight the technical layers, the technology, and then the public at the bottom. But what's important here is there is a notional split in the control structure for the shifts. So there's a shift control structure for the night shift and the day shift, and it has the same, in principle, it has the same roles and responsibilities, but in reality it has different people. And so when the shift change is occurring, there will have been a night shift person in place of employee 1 doing the same function, and then when they swap over to the day shift, that role is then taken over by employee 1. But obviously at the time that this change was going on, the night shift supervisor discussed with the day shift supervisor, we want to do a changeover alert, a changeover drill. And so there were still some of the night shift people in the control room, in the state warning point. And so some of those weren't really sure who should do what, who should take responsibility. So that confusion aggravated things, made things potentially worse, slowed their response down. Okay, so that's employee 4. Right, so there's the STE phone. So let's have a look then. So there's the STE phone equipment, and then there's a speaker. And there's somebody, employee 2. There's an employee 2. Oh, this, hang on a minute, that's not right. Surely not. Right, hang on, so that's my mistake. So this is actually employee 5. But there is an employee 2. I don't know what their role is, but I do know that they had a bit of a chat about the previous night, because the night shift, the previous night, as I mentioned earlier, they had a drill sprung on them as well. And so it's likely that the night shift supervisor thought that they'd do the same to the following day shift and see what happened. And so I suppose that decision is what instigated this particular accident from occurring, but we'll talk about that. So the night shift supervisor talked with employee 2, who's on the different shift. And employee 2 is the person who actually interacted with the STE, the secure telephone equipment. So the US military, as I've put here, this link, in fact I'll draw that on here so it's really sort of clear, like this. So this is PACOM, Pacific Command, and they're the ones that essentially issue the message via the STE. And obviously, because this was a drill, they didn't do that. Actually, it was this night shift supervisor who did it. So I'll just put other. So this is the other state warning point through. So that's the other, either shift, it doesn't matter. So the employee for the night shift supervisor, he discussed with employee 2 about it. He also discussed with employee 5, the day shift supervisor. But the day shift supervisor and the night shift supervisor, they were actually physically outside the state warning point. So they were isolated from this part of the control structure. Employee 2 was inside the state warning point. And so employee 2's got so many pens. Where have I put the blue pen? So this is the difficulty, there's so many pens. So the mental model of this person was that they were expecting a test to occur. So when they heard from the STE that it's a drill, exercise, 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 they knew that it was a drill. These other people, they also have a mental model, and they knew also that it was a drill. So it's about this interaction here. Why was the mental model of this person? Why did they not believe that it was a drill? And it could be that when this message was sent from the ship supervisor, as I mentioned earlier on, when this person activates the speakerphone, there may have been a slight delay or slight overlap, which means that that might have been missed. And so this person didn't hear exercise, exercise, exercise. I don't like using too many colours though, because it gets really complicated. So this message will be exercise, 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 message, message, message. This is not a drill. So what I'm saying is, if this, from here to here, if that bit is cut off, and this person only hears that part, that might explain why they didn't hear this part. Well, they didn't know it was an exercise from there. This is not a drill, so their mental model is, hang on, this is not a drill, this is real. And then the realization of how serious that is, all these people are going to get killed, I need to get this message out as quick as possible. And so that's their behaviour about alert sense. Let's get the message out. So strictly speaking, from this point downwards in the control structure, there hasn't been any failures. The system has behaved as designed, as it's supposed to do in a real scenario. But the fact that everything outside of this sort of area is in exercise mode, and that mental model has not been updated appropriately, that's why this accident has occurred. And so the high-level safety constraint is, make sure that everybody's mental model around the control structure is in sync and changes at the right times. And the other thing as well is, this person already knew that it was going to be an exercise. So they may not have been focusing on what everybody else was hearing in the room. And it may be that this person was so involved in logging into the alert sense quickly, making sure not to type the password wrong because it'll take ages to get it sorted, that they responded, they were high workload and they were focusing on that. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the other parts of the control structure. So, well, in fact, let's just quickly run through the forecast steps, actually. That would probably be better. So I've just drawn the high-level part of the control structure. We've identified a few issues with the way these interactions are and physical separations. So let's just talk about the forecast steps. So the first is to identify requirements and unsafe control actions. So focusing on the employee. So their safety constraints, their safety requirements are that they should, upon the receipt of a real message, they should act fast, get onto the alert sense system and send a real live broadcast as soon as possible. Now the unsafe control action is because, from a system perspective, they sent a message, a real message, when there was no missile threat. But there was no way for them to know or realise that based on the feedback that we've already seen. So that's the unsafe control action here. What are the mental model, process model flaws? Well, it's already clear that the mental model flaw was that they believed it was a real situation. So that's why they behaved the way they did. What was the context, especially for decisions for this individual? Well, the context was they didn't hear the exercise, allegedly. They heard this is not a drill. So that should have been sufficient for them to act as fast as possible. And what other questions are there? Well, you know, if this person is sat on their own issuing this message and there's no one overlooking what they're doing, because they're given a specific task to act as quick as possible, well, so that we're expecting them to act as fast as possible. So we wouldn't expect to have, as they've recommended, two people basically overlooking what they're doing. The whole point is to get the message out as quick as possible. So what other things were going on that would have helped to update this mental model or potentially contribute to their mental model staying incorrect? Because obviously their mental model changed when they received the wireless emergency alert that said, hey, you know, you've sent a real alert. And they would have been expecting that because that's what they've done. And they may have been sat there in shock receiving, you know, the real world messages. But then everyone else would have started to talk about this. They would have been like, well, hang on, we're doing a drill. Why have we received this? That's not what's supposed to happen. And then all the other activity would have, you know, would have kicked off. Let's build a little bit more of the control structure. So employee 4 initiated the drill. Employee 3 started the countdown timer. Employee 2 simulated activating the warning siren, wall tone siren. So we could put some more technology in here. So we've got the countdown timer. We've got the whale tone siren. And we've got verbal indication of completion of the action. So that was employee 3. So there's employee 3 here, and they're interacting with the countdown timer. And then you've got employee 2 also interacting with the countdown timer. Like that. And then verbal confirmation. So I don't know whether employee 3 did, probably don't need confirmation of that. But this verbal confirmation, I don't know if there's any verbal confirmation from employee 1. And again, where does that verbal confirmation go to? And is it loud enough and sufficient that everybody on the team in that room can update their mental models so that they know that in this case the whale tone siren has been set and that the alert sensor has been logged into and a message is on its way. So the point of that feedback is to give everybody a common mental model. How effective that is, I don't know. That would have to be found out as part of the investigation. Okay. So that's where we are. So then employee 13.6 and the Adjutant General called the state warning point. I'm not going to model that over here because I've already got it there. These are there. So they received their messages via the wireless emergency alerts, and then they called the state warning point crew. Now it's interesting that this doesn't really make it clear how the Department of Defence were contacted. So I know from other sources that the HIEMA director contacted the US military and then confirmed that it wasn't a real situation. So the Honolulu Police Department, so they will be, in terms of modelling, I would have included them in there. They've contacted the state warning point. I'm not going to go, I don't need to go into that level of detail for modelling, because a lot of this is the response afterwards, and we acknowledge that the response was not adequate, and that was, quite significantly due to them not being prepared. And the reason that they've not been prepared is due to the high level of the control structure not adequately identifying the things that they needed to do. So let's have a look. Yeah. Okay. I don't really think there's any need to go into much more detail above this level, because you've got some layer of management, HYEMA management, which will be effectively controlling, all of this. Not this bit. Not that bit, because that's the military. Controlling this part, like that. And there's not enough information in the investigation report, because they didn't look at that in any detail above this point. So the investigation report that I've looked at, that we've gone through, really focuses on this part, but sort of focuses mostly on the employee. So I'm hoping you can see that if you're building a control structure like this as part of your investigation using CAST, it's clear that it opens you up to think about many more factors than just pointing fingers and trying to assign blame to people. So that's about it really. I think I've done it, in quite a lot of detail. Let's have a look, see how many questions and comments you've got, and then I'll answer any of those questions. If I need to draw on the board, I will do. Otherwise, I think that's about enough for today. Right, so let's do that. Right, so let's have a look. Face. Don't know what to press. Hello again. Hello again. Right. So, to the people who are watching, what do you think to what I've done? What do you think to what I've gone through? Are there any particular questions or observations? Are you interested in learning a bit more about the actual CAST analysis, so those 4 steps that I mentioned? Is there something that I can particularly do for you? If there is, please comment now. Right, okay, well, there don't appear to be any questions this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call an end to the live stream. We've been going on a bit longer than I was expecting. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you're watching this as a replay, don't forget to comment. If you like this video, please press the like button, share it with your friends and colleagues, and of course, give me some ideas for what you'd like to see and learn about, and I'll do my best to do that. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Have a good night. Bye-bye.